Life is a funny thing, and fate is one of those words that gets thrown around a lot. Do our choices matter? Is free will real? Are we all genetically predetermined to do the things that we do? Do we live life, or does life live us? Is there purpose to our existence? This is the main theme that we'll be discussing today as we look at the ending of Naoki Urasawa's Billy Bat. If you haven't read this story before, I definitely do advise reading through it before I go and spoil the ending. There is a full plot summary that, I have prepared earlier. Now, I do have a quick amendment to make as well. In my Should You Read video, I did say that the central theme was hope in spite of everything. But now that I've actually gone through the story piece by piece, I'm not so sure that is the case. While certainly an idea discussed in the series, I would hesitate to call it the primary theme. So yes, today we're talking about how Billy Bat explores the idea of free will as we discuss the ending. This video is going to be more of a theme breakdown of the ending and how that ties through the series. Next time we'll be looking at it from a more in-story perspective, going through character motivations and taking a more internal view. I've always thought that there are three endings to Billy Bat. There's Kevin's final conversation with the Bat in the Basque Cave, then Kevin and Timmy's final farewell, then the soldier's ending. Each of these places would actually be a perfect place to end the story, but each one adds or develops something a little bit extra. The first ending deals with Billy's story ending alongside Kevin Yamagata's, then secondly it is Kevin Goodman and Timmy's story ending, and then finally the third soldier ending is humanity's story ending. An important note before we crack in, I'm not a widely read literary sort of fellow with English degrees and bestseller books. I'm just some dude who likes a story and I want to share my perspectives. Just a disclaimer in case you're expecting a beautiful literary thesis here. Okay, let's go. We're going to be breaking this down into two sections. We're going to talk about free will as the primary theme and then quickly talk about authenticity as a secondary theme. For this story, there are two broad lenses that we can look through. Firstly, that every decision our characters made was following some grand drama written by the Bat. Or, secondly, that our characters made their own decisions and there was no script from Billy that they were following. With any black and white scenario, this series is more accurately seen as shades of grey. Kevin Yamagata summarises this quite nicely in the Tibet Cave. He says that he made the decision to go to Dallas in '63 and it was his decision to save the younger Kevin and let JFK die. But when asked, he can't say that the Bat didn't influence this decision. To explain this, let's real quick talk about free will. So a good explanation that I heard, which I think came from a Joseph Anderson video, is imagine that you find a genie in a lamp and it lets you relive your life from the very start. The only caveat is you forget everything and start completely fresh. After taking the wish, would you go through the exact same series of actions, the same choices, eventually leading you back to the genie in the lamp the second time around? If so, you would say that your life is on rails. You don't make any real decisions because you're always going to take the same series of actions that lead you back to the genie. On the other hand, if our choices matter, shouldn't you be able to choose an action that doesn't lead to the genie? Are you always fated to meet the genie and restart your life? Alright, this is already getting heavy for an explanation of a manga ending, so let's keep going. Let's use another explanation. Imagine at the end of your life, you wrote a book that detailed your life perfectly, with every single action you ever took. Now, imagine that book existed when you were born, but you never got to read it. Would you say that you had no free will? You will follow every single action in that book to the letter, never diverting from a single line. Could you ever make a decision to go against that story? Do your choices really matter? Alrighty, let's move past the Psych 101 talk and get back to Billy Bat. I believe that Billy has a good idea of the ending story for humanity, but characters can and do change the narrative along the journey. We've already talked about this briefly in the Billy video, which explains our theories around why characters can change the narrative, links in the description. Even though Billy was surprised that Kurusu didn't make his wish at the end of Spaceman, Billy still had 9/11 details on his scroll, an event that happened 20 years after his planned end of the world. Also, we see this panel from Zofu and Hitler far before the final chapter. So, most likely, Billy had longer-reaching plans. The question is, could or did our main heroes make their own choices? Well, I think Billy said it best. It's all up to interpretation. I believe the message of the story is not to actually give us an answer as to yes or no, but to simply present the idea. When you start questioning the character's autonomy, you start to question your own. Of course Lee went ahead and shot the army general. He was conditioned again and again to believe that he was the country's hero. By looking at the circumstances affecting him, it made sense that he'd do that. Of course you're sitting here watching a YouTube video about a cult classic comic. By looking at the circumstances affecting you, it would certainly make sense that you'd do that. If our actions are just the sum of all the conditions affecting us, then what agency do we have? What agency did Lee have to exit the story like Kevin asked him? Throughout the story, Billy is constantly saying that he has no grand narrative, that he gives no visions and grants no signs, that the authors themselves are the ones who make up the stories. So perhaps there is no long-reaching plan at all, and our characters were really making their own choices the whole time. They invented narratives for themselves that the Bat merely reflected back at them. Kanbei wants to deliver the scroll, and the Bat coaxes him to strike down Yajiro to keep it. Lee wants to be a hero, so the Bat tells him that. Shisho doesn't want to kill Sissy, so the Bat never tells him to. Kevin wants to return to drawing, so the Bat tells him that's what he should do. Looking at it in this context, every choice our characters made were their own, if supernaturally supported. The lines are blurry all through this story. For me, I think this gets hammered home at the end of the Lee Harvey Oswald arc, where Kevin Yamagata is talking to the Goodmans. They say it sounds like one grand story, and this is especially hard for Kevin, who spends the first half of this arc drinking himself stupid to avoid hearing or being influenced by the Bat. Okay, time to go through the endings and see how this actually plays out. When Kevin meets the Bats in the cave, this is the climax of the entire story's planning. Kevin has followed details found by Kevin Yamagata from the Momochi Scroll, defended by ninjas past and secret agents present. He's rose to stardom and dropped to nothing. He's prophesied successfully to stop Kurusu, and he's prophesied unsuccessfully over 9/11. Now, he's at the cave with the Billies as they merge, asking what he's supposed to do next. This sounds like Kevin has been dancing quite neatly along this great narrative that the Bat has planned. So the Bats probably did plan this all out. But then the Bat reminds us of how they originally split into 3 parts, a story that Kevin made up years before. This Bat then tells Kevin what he wants to hear. The only thing left for him to do is to draw. So perhaps Kevin was writing his own story, pulling the pieces together into the life that he wanted to live. 2 theories that we can argue about endlessly and get nowhere. 2 theories that could both be right, depending on your interpretation. Timmy's goal had been an interesting one. He wanted to create safe havens for his fans to protect them all from a bad future that he saw coming. When we catch up with him at the ending, he's achieved this. The world is living through the bad future he saw, and Timmy has set up Billylands as centres of refuge all over the world. A place where war, famine, and the misery of the world cannot reach. At the beginning, this was achieved by pushing his Billy Bat across the world, taking up the mantle from TV Chuck and killing off everyone that wasn't him. Now, Timmy has had no contact with the Bat over the entire series. We see that his drawing of Billy isn't related to the Bat at all. Across the journey, it gives us a good case that this was the character's story all along. Timmy was the one that completed the 9/11 prophecy with no input from Billy or the scroll. He merely wrote what he thought would make a good story. In Timmy's last panel, we can see that he's actually still cut up about never having seen the Bat, so this ending tends more towards the idea of our characters' choices mattering. The final ending is another matter of perspective. Billy quits his meddling and he leaves. Humanity is left to sort out how it wants to progress from here on. We pick up years later when things have gotten so much worse, but we end with Kevin Goodman's Pharaoh's Curse. We see how this comic affects just one child in this world, and we see that there's still hope for humanity after all. If you haven't pieced it together yet, this panel in the final chapter was brought up by Zofu and Hitler's art years and arcs before. Now, if you're a cynical sort, you can look at this as Billy leaves, then the next time we see humanity, it's this arid wasteland on the brink of collapse. That as soon as humanity got the reins on its own story, it drove it into the ground. Alternatively, you could see this as growing pains as humanity shakes off the Bat leech before turning around into a brighter future following Kevin's comic. Looking at this ending through the lens that our characters actually made fully independent choices is quite fatalistic, especially for Kevin. This paints humanity as generally destructive, and that left to our own devices will eventually run ourselves down. For Kevin, he had every advantage possible. He would control the Golden Cola water resources, he would control Culkin Enterprises, the world's most powerful company, he would have had the heart of the people through his Billy Bat comics. Instead, he loses them all to Timmy, who squanders them in pursuit of his own dreams. It would be nice to say that the Bat led him to all those bad positions as part of some great narrative, but that's probably not entirely true. Kevin just made some bad mistakes, and the world suffered for it. So what's the overall message? We don't know if our actions have any real impact, if we're just a computer acting out of our conditions, if fate drags us along some grand story that we'll never see the full scope of. From the Kevins, Caruso, Lee, Timmy, we don't know if they managed to write their own story or simply followed the Bat's master plan. And that's okay. That's what life is. We don't get all the answers. It's the way that you choose to interpret it that matters in the end. Ultimately, we still choose the actions we take and our responses. Whether that's to play to someone else's narrative or to our own, that's up for us to decide. Authentic. Of an undisputed quality. Not a copy. Genuine. It's really easy to see the ties of authenticity through this story. Let's take a quick stroll down the timeline for some context before we crack into the ending. Authenticity is actually our inciting incident for this whole story. Kevin's Billy Bat is challenged by the policeman spying on TV Chuck. Kevin's own history will not let him steal someone else's work. That's what happened to his dad, and he died a poor man. In Lee's arc, we see TV Chuck was taken over by Billy Bat and turned into a national phenomenon. Kevin's quest for authenticity was the chance for someone else to get him like they got his father. In Komori Village, Davivi chooses Chuck Culkin as the authentic Billy Bat, burning down and killing all others. In Spaceman, Chuck's years of drawing this other Billy catch up with him, and he hands the reins of Billy back to an authentic artist, to Kevin Goodman. By Golden Age, Kevin mistakes Timmy as an authentic successor and loses everything. Throughout these arcs, we're concerned with what Billy is saying too. Are these genuine ideas from the author or prophecies taken from the Bat? Okay, stage set, let's go to the ending. We're going to skip over the first ending here, as it's the other two that make the biggest impacts on this idea. What I want to focus on is Timmy can draw Billy perfectly. Last we saw, Timmy couldn't draw anything, not even a circle, but now he can draw Billy perfectly again. What changed? Timmy tells us that Billy isn't even the main attraction at Billyland anymore. He stopped drawing Billy a long time ago. Like Chuck, when he was drawing the fake Billy, it wasn't sustainable. Now, being asked to draw again after years by Kevin, Timmy is still as good as ever. He's drawing his Billy again, before it went back to Chuck's version at the end of Golden Age. When he's drawing his Billy, it all comes naturally to him. But most of his career, he's been supporting this fake Billy, not believing in the strength of his own authentic Billy. This is to say, I think that Timmy did have his own genuine version of Billy Bat. It might not have been the same version that the Kevins had or Zofu had, as in, Timmy did not have a connection to the real character Billy Bat, but the comic series itself that he was writing was his own. It was something that he developed and something that was real to him. When he backpedaled Billy back to Chuck Culkin's version of Billy Bat, that's when it stopped being genuine, and that's when it stopped being successful, and that was the start of Timmy's decline in Billy Bat. Final ending. Kevin's Billy Bat has survived the test of time. His authentic work, The Pharaoh's Curse, that he travelled the world to complete, is now going to change the world. Timmy's Billy is disregarded. He was never a real Billy Bat author. He didn't have the heart of justice needed to be real, and he wasn't committing to his own work. This is reinforcing the idea that only the genuine article will manage to survive. This is like how Chuck's Billy died before Kevin came along to revive it. Chuck stole Kevin Yamagata's Billy, and that could only last so long. The same thing happened to Timmy. He stole Kevin Goodman's Billy, and that could also only last so long. The ending tells us to be real about what we do. If we want to do something that will last, it has to be genuine. Not only that, but we need to be authentic to ourselves. Kevin followed what his purpose was, to draw. He never knew if what he said would make a difference, but he drew anyway, because that's who he was. Character and in-universe ending explained will be out soon. Thanks for listening to me ramble about trying to find a cohesive theme across the story that went through 3 separate serializations. Let me know your own thoughts. What did I miss? What's your interpretation? I think Billy is supposed to present these ideas rather than give us nice tidy answers, and your own experience will determine what you get out of this story. These are just my thoughts, and I'll tell you that every time I think I get a handle on what's being said, there's always some other part of the story that casts doubt on it all. So I'm genuinely really curious to see what other people's thoughts are. Thanks for watching. This has been CG, and I'll see you Gs in the next one.